June is officially Pride Month in the United States. Across the country, millions of people mark this month with celebrations, parades, and festivals highlighting and celebrating the LGBTQ community. But in its original incarnation, Pride wasn't a party. It was an event that harked back to the gay and lesbian community's struggle for equality. Some Republican legislators and party leaders are on a mission to make the fight for gay rights and equality even more difficult. How is the gay community fighting back? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
The gay rights movement in the United States has seen huge progress in the last century, and especially in the last 2 decades. Laws prohibiting homosexual activity have been struck down. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals can now serve openly in the military, and same-sex couples can now legally get married and adopt children in all 50 states. But it has been a long and bumpy road for gay rights proponents, many of whom are still advocating for employment, housing, and transgender rights. Governors in states like Florida are making this struggle even more complicated by signing into law the controversial Don't Say Gay bill. This bill bans lessons on sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. And the Texas Republican Party just announced that it has included in their official party platform a statement that being gay is abnormal and stating its vigorous opposition to all efforts to validate transgender identity. How dangerous are these laws and other anti-gay pieces of legislation? It's causing us all to ask, is the gay community under attack, particularly by red states? My first guest today is Dr. Melissa Michelson. She is a dean and professor of political science at Menlo College. She is a nationally recognized expert in LGBTQ politics and the award-winning author of several books, including Transforming Prejudice. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Michelson.
Morning.
Well, I got
Thanks. Good morning.
to ask you about this headline coming out of Texas this weekend. This GOP platform, calling homosexuality abnormal. What was your response when you saw or heard about this official party platform by the Republican Party in a huge state like the state of Texas?
Yeah, it's really horrible. It encourages people to hate and to commit violence against members of the LGBTQ community when it has this kind of official sanction. And so it's horrible and distressing, but it's also not surprising because we've seen over the last decade a real push against especially transgender rights by the Republican Party. And so, yes, of course, the Texas Republican Party would do this because they've been attacked for a decade in order to rile up their base and win elections.
What do you think has happened? Because in the opening, I talked about the huge progress, and that progress is real. There have been, we've seen the elimination of so many laws in this country that really banned gay people from engaging in, activity that other individuals, heterosexual individuals, are allowed to, engage in, such as marriage. But yet we have seen, as you just said, in the last decade, this huge anti-gay push, particularly by Republicans. So what's the origins of this push to reverse the gains that were made over the last couple of decades?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. One is that, yes, there have been enormous gains, especially in terms of acceptance of gay and lesbian people and their rights to live, to marry, to adopt children, as you mentioned. And most Americans, including Republicans, now support those rights. But there has been a shift by the Republican Party from their attacks on gay and lesbian people in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to now more of a focus on attacks on transgender people. And attitudes towards transgender people really haven't advanced nearly as much. Many people still fear transgender people, are disgusted by transgender people, don't understand them, have a lot of discomfort. And so it's in a way more of a safe space, just a terrible way to put it, but it's a safe space for the Republican Party to push back against the LGBTQ community and to use transgender people as a boogeyman and to rile up their base, as I mentioned. Not so much against gay and lesbian marriage, right? Not so much against folks who people now understand. These are people we know, these are people we love, which was the huge success of the LGBTQ movement in the 90s. But transgender, not so much. And there's just a lot of fear and discomfort still out there that the Republican Party is exploiting.
So I hear you when you say that they're using transgender people as kind of the target, but this party platform from the GOP says very clearly that homosexuality is abnormal. And now it goes on to talk about transgender, but it singles out homosexuality. So it doesn't just focus on transgender. They obviously could have done that, but they chose to very clearly and unequivocally state homosexuality as abnormal. So that seems to suggest that this is much bigger than just about transgender people.
Yeah, and it is somewhat surprising that Texas is really circling all the way back to the way the United States used to talk about gay people back in the 1950s. And it is somewhat surprising that they would go that far. On the other hand, the Texas Republican Party has been going far on lots of issues, rights and other rights by historically marginalized communities and by women. And so on the one hand, it's surprising. On the other hand, we're talking about the Texas Republican Party. And so they just seem to be enjoying going to the extreme on every issue. But I don't think that this is the direction that most Republicans in the country are going to go.
Well, that's a good question. So what does it mean for a party like the GOP party of Texas to adopt something in its party platform? Does that mean that everyone that's running as a Republican in the state of Texas, adopts this platform? What weight, if any, does this party platform have on Republican candidates?
I would actually say not that much. I would say, other than news coverage like this, most people in Texas aren't going to be particularly aware of the Republican platform. It's something that they'll use for fundraising. It's something that they'll use their base. But individual candidates in Texas are not going to run on the platform. They're going to run on their own issues. And if they think that their voters are not going to be with them if they support that platform, they're not going to support that platform. So I think there really is definitely a disconnect between the things that state parties and national parties and counties put in their platforms and the way that individual candidates run. Individual candidates are going to run on, inflation and gas prices and jobs, climate change, et cetera. In Texas, other issues, but they're not going to all be 100% in on the platform. So I guess, yes, it's horrifying. It's horrible that the Texas Republican Party would do this, but I'm not particularly concerned that every Republican in Texas now is going to have to sign on to that.
Okay, so I agree with you that every candidate doesn't have to sign on to the party, but I think we have seen enough evidence throughout these midterms that there are many Republican Party members who are running on these kind of, base issues. They're not running on gas prices and jobs and housing and issues that keep most Americans up. Many of them are running on these issues that, are personal individual liberties and rights kind of issues, because they know they do rile up their base. It plays into these huge culture wars that we've seen. So,
right. But for example, if you're here in California, Republicans in California are not going to run on an anti-LGBTQ platform, right? Because you're never going to get elected in California. And Republicans do get elected in California, although not as much as Democrats. But for them, that wouldn't be a winning issue, right? And so I think it depends. Like, are you a Republican running in Austin, or are you a Republican running in Houston or Dallas? And so the things that you focus on are going to differ. I'm not Texas. Things they're talking about.
Yeah, maybe you and I see this a little differently, because I feel like this plays really into the culture wars that we're seeing. And even at the national level, we're seeing these culture wars played out by obviously people like Donald Trump. And you did mention the California Republicans. And let's talk about these more, what I guess we can agree are more moderate Republicans. We haven't seen them come out and condemn this party platform. Do you expect these California or the other moderate Republicans to do that?
Nope. I do not expect to see any great moments in political courage by anybody right now. But I do think that we maybe shouldn't overreact to what the Texas Republican Party is doing. I think what we should be more focused on is the hate that political all over the country are engendering with their attacks on the LGBTQ community and particularly on transgender people. Personally, I don't see this platform as big of a threat to the community as I do the laws that are being passed in state after state that are attacking, criminalizing transgender people, taking away their access to care, encouraging people to hate them and to treat them as non-human. That to me is really the top line concern right now, not a party platform, which may or may not actually result in any changes in legislation. What the Texas Republican Party is doing right now to take away access to care to transgender people, I think, is far more horrible and far more of an immediate concern.
Yeah, and clearly the issue of laws that are being passed is something to be concerned about, but these laws don't come out of a vacuum. Many times these laws are the result of individuals getting together like these Texas Republicans and starting with statements put in their platforms that then get picked up by legislators and then translated into laws. So let's talk about the Florida law, the Don't Say Gay law that was signed by DeSantis, basically preventing educators in the state of Florida from teaching gender identity to K through third grades explicitly, but others believing that the law will have even larger implications on other grades. What does the gay community do to fight back against, a law like this one passed in Florida?
Well, what they are doing is organizing and suing, right? Because there's a lot in the law that's unclear, right? It talks about curriculum, but it's unclear. Does that include anything a teacher says? Does it include things that a paraprofessional says or a school nurse says? And so the number one thing that the community is doing to fight is suing to show that the law is unconstitutionally vague and means that teachers and other members of schools can't do their jobs, and also to push back in terms of building up public opposition to the bill, because even courts, but especially elected political officials do respond to public opinion. And if there's enough of a pushback against these laws, then elected officials will change their mind. So I think what's happening is the Republican Party in Florida and DeSantis thinks this is a winning issue. This is something the public will be behind. But if instead the public says, no, actually, we don't want that, please stop, then you'll see elected officials change their mind. And if there's a cover of law where the governor can say, oh, well, I guess this is unconstitutional, I can't do it, then he can save face and change what he's doing. And so it's this dual track approach of trying to change, build up support for the LGBTQ community and fight the law in the courts to show that it's unconstitutional. And that's what we're seeing all over the country.
Well, we saw Disney, Professor, do exactly what you said and try to stand up and oppose this law after its employees were outraged that Disney didn't take a stance on it. So it was let's give credit to where credit is due, and that's not to the corporate executives at Disney as much as it is to those employees at Disney that work in Florida who said this was outrageous and who were concerned about the negative implications of this law. And then Disney did stand up, and we saw DeSantis take punitive actions against Disney, revoking some special tax status that it had, and really waging this war against this huge corporation, Disney, huge employer, calling it the woke corporation. So what does that do for other corporations, you think, that may be interested in, or maybe would be inclined, I should say, to take a stance against some of these anti-gay laws when they see what the repercussions were for a company like Disney?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm as disgusted by many people by the corporatization of Pride, but if you've got Target and Walmart selling Pride, Oreo cookies selling Pride, Disney selling Pride, it's because they know where the market is. They know where the dollars are and where the public is. And I think that's actually an indication of where this will go, which is that the public and the corporations and their marketing executives are going to push the government to be more accepting. When governments go too far, when we get things like in North Carolina, where they passed HB2 and they tried to block transgender people from using bathrooms, and there was a huge backlash from all these giant corporations, and all the money was lost by the state. This changed mind, right? And it doesn't mean it happens overnight, but corporations and the public on one side versus elected officials on the other, the public and the corporations will win. And the corporations are with the public because they know that most Americans support LGBTQ rights.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of commercialization of Pride. We were just having this conversation last week with respect to Juneteenth and how companies created Juneteenth products, from ice cream to party packs. And we had some experts on the show who were disgusted by that and felt these corporations were taking advantage of this very significant and serious day, and rather than educating the public about the meaning of Juneteenth, really commercializing it in a way that was offensive to a lot of African Americans. Has the LGBT community, to your knowledge, have they had a similar reaction to the Oreo cookies and the Pride, merchandise, from hats to clothes to all the different merchandise that you can find on the shelves? What's the general reaction been from the LGBT community from this commercialization?
I don't know that I can sum it up in one sentence. I would say that for many people, it's great, right? Love all the Pride stuff. Love being able to see all the Pride stuff on all these shelves. But if corporations are being two-faced, right? If they're not supporting LGBTQ people in their corporation with their policies, with their, say, healthcare coverage or the way that they're making political donations, then folks are outing them on social media and saying like, hey, you can't sell us all this rainbow stuff and then give money to Republicans who are trying to erase us. And so in a way, it's helpful in a weird way, because you can say to these corporations like, great, you're making money off us. Put your money where your mouth is in terms of your politics. And
I wonder, Professor,
companies doing the right thing. So it's. Sorry, I'm trying not to cut you off.
No, I know you're freezing a little, and it's hard for me to hear you. But I do wonder how much power people have, because I was reading the headline since we're in the midst of these January 6th insurrection hearings, and they listed out corporations who have supported Donald Trump and the big lie. And there were some corporations on there that I was shocked to see, corporations who I would not expect. So how prevalent, or how pervasive, I guess is the word, is corporate support for Republicans who are engaged in this abhorrent conduct, from the big lie about the election to the insurrection on January 6th to, supporting lawmakers enacting these anti-gay laws? I think people would be shocked to know that some of their favorite companies are providing huge sums of money to Republican leadership.
They are. And when a particularly egregious case comes to light, that's when you see people boycotting and pushing on those corporations to change their policies or to change their giving strategies. It's hard to keep that up consistently, but it is definitely something that the LGBTQ community, and it sounds like the Black community and other communities, are keeping an eye on. And I think that's one of the benefits of social media, is that you can signal boost those horrible incidents and you can get people's attention and try to get people to move their dollars. But people have short attention spans, and social movements are hard and long, and people get distracted. And so, we push back when we can, and then people get distracted by the next news item, and then they go back to shopping at that company because they want that product.
Yeah, and finally, I want to ask you about this week's decision we're expecting from the Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade. Many people think that if the Supreme Court does what we think it's going to do based on that leaked opinion, that could have implications for gay marriage. Are you concerned at all that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that the next case we see next year or 2 years from now may be a challenge to gay marriage?
Absolutely. They'll throw it back to the states and we'll be where we were before Obergefell. I think they absolutely are going to do it. I think it's a definite, realistic risk that they are going to do it. Because based on the Alito draft, same-sex marriage is not something that's in the original list of rights that we have in the Constitution. And so if people who can reproduce don't have a right to abortions, and people who don't have a right to marry people of the same sex, I think would absolutely be on the table, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did it. It's not what the public wants. That's not what the public wants on Roe versus Wade either. But I think it's the signal that the Supreme Court is giving. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Michelson, for joining me this morning. Thank you for the work that you're doing nationwide in terms of raising awareness about these issues and just helping people understand what's at stake. We'll definitely be watching that Supreme Court case very closely to see what happens. And as you said, it does have broader implications for other rights that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. Again, we'll be following that very closely. Thank you again for joining me this morning. My next guest is Joanna Harper. She is a visiting fellow for transgender athletic performance at Loughborough University in England. She's also the author of Sporting Gender, the history, science, and stories of transgender and intersex athletes. Good morning and welcome, Joanna.
Good morning. It's actually afternoon here in England, but
okay. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me from the UK. I want to ask you though. We saw this World Swimming governing body come out just Sunday with this ban on transgender athletes, and the ban is from competing in women's events. What was your response when you saw the news, the headlines about it?
I was disappointed, but not particularly surprised. Certainly, since the Leah Thomas the case arose several months ago, it's been clear that swimming authorities are doing their best to enact rules to prevent transgender swimmers. And first of all, it should be noted that the FINA rule, FINA is the governing body for swimming, world swimming, if you prefer, but the FINA rule enacted on Sunday only applies to international swim meets, and no trans swimmer, to the best of my knowledge, has ever swum internationally in a swim meet. So this rule doesn't actually affect anyone as it currently stands. The danger, however, is that national governing bodies for swimming, including USA Swimming, will adopt the same rule. And if USA Swimming does, then Leah Thomas won't be able to swim anymore competitively.
You mentioned Leah Thomas. Tell us briefly what her story is. You know, she was swimming at a Division I school, University of Pennsylvania, and apparently she beat some student from Harvard who was swimming, and that started this controversy. Give us the background on the story.
So Leah Thomas was assigned male and was swimming for the University of Pennsylvania men's swim team for 2.5 years, finishing up swimming in the men's team in the fall of 2019. She actually started her hormone therapy in May of 2019. The 2021 season was taken away by COVID, and so She delayed her senior competitive year until 21-22, and she put up some early season results that got some notice, but it was the Zippy Invite in Akron, Ohio in December, where Leah won 3 events that caused this sort of national outcry.
So let's to be clear, Leah originally swam as a man, went through hormone therapy, and then in this 21-22 season started swimming in the women's division.
Correct.
Okay. And she won, you said these meets in Ohio got national attention.
Yeah, she put up the leading times in 2 of the 3 events, leading NCAA Division I times. At the end of the season in March, she went on to win the NCAA championship in the 500 yards. She tied for 5th in the 200 and placed 8th in the 100. Obviously outstanding results, but she was a pretty good swimmer before. She also was second 3 times in the Ivy League championships in the 2018-19 season, I believe. So, Leah was certainly a very good swimmer before in the men's division. She's a somewhat more successful swimmer now in the women's division.
So Olympic gold medalist swimmer and transgender Caitlyn Jenner said to Fox News over the weekend that she supports the ban of transgender, and she said what's fair is fair, and it's not fair for transgender women to take part in transgender sports or to take, to participate in sports based on their new assignment. Make the argument for us as to why Leah should be included in D1 swimming based on her transition to womanhood.
So trans women go on hormone therapy, which consists of a testosterone suppressing drug plus estrogen. And that has marked effects on the athletic performance of trans women. Trans women will get slower, will lose muscle mass, their hemoglobin levels will drop, and hemoglobin is the single most important factor in endurance events. So there are a number of changes that will occur in the body. The science is in its infancy on exactly how trans women perform in sports, but at Loughborough University in England, we have 3 studies underway, and we're the first university in the world to do this sort of physiological research. But it's clear that other universities will soon be following, and once we get a more critical mass of people studying this, we'll be able to say exactly what happens to trans women. But there's no evidence that trans women are on the verge of taking over women's sports at all. There are a few successful trans women, but overall trans women are still hugely underrepresented in sports.
Well, I know you said that your university is doing some research to study what the physiological differences might be once they take trans women take these hormones. Is there any science today, currently, that suggests or that confirms that trans women do have a physical competitive advantage?
So trans women have advantages. On average, transgender women will be taller, bigger, and stronger, even after hormone therapy, than cisgender or typical women. And those are advantages in many sports, not all sports, but many sports. Mm-hmm. Transgender women, however, are also powering their larger frames with reduced muscle mass and reduced aerobic capacity. That can lead to disadvantage in things like quickness and recovery and endurance. Trans women also have a propensity to gain weight with hormone therapy, and that is disadvantageous disadvantageous in most sports. So there are advantages, but there are also disadvantages. And sports performance is multifactorial. So just saying that trans women have advantages doesn't mean that trans women are overall advantaged. And so until we have more evidence, we can't say for sure exactly whether trans women are overall advantaged in a given sport or not. And certainly the fact that the trans women haven't taken over women's sports, are nowhere near close, certainly is an indirect indication that it is reasonable to allow trans women and cis women to compete against one another. But as I say, the science is in its infancy, and there's a lot of things we need to learn.
And I was going to ask you, do you think it would be fair to wait until the science is clear and there's a more definitive answer? I don't know, and how long is it going to take for us to get to that science?
Well, I'd love to say it'll be next year, but it won't. It's going to be 20 to 30 years. And when you say wait, there are people who, including the International Olympic Committee, the highest governing body for sports, who has said there shouldn't be any restrictions on trans athletes until we have definitive data. So the IOC is saying, don't put any restrictions on trans women until we have definitive data. The people at FINA, the governing body for sport, are saying, let's not let any trans woman who's gone through male puberty compete. So, we have these two very opposing sides saying, well, and we don't have definitive data. One side says, don't let them compete. The other side says, don't put any restrictions on. And I would suggest, if I were advising sports governing bodies, and I do, that, do the best you can with the data that exists today, but understand that anything you create today will be a living document, and review it in a few years. And hopefully there'll be more and better data that will help you create better policy in the future.
So you raise a good point, because one of the things this governing swimming body said was they had 71% who voted in favor of this new policy, but they are allowing for anyone that transitioned before the age of 12 to compete in women's events. They say, this governing body says, that the science is clear that if you transition after the start of puberty, you do have some kind of advantage. Do you disagree with the conclusion that they've reached about puberty being the deciding, period at which someone has or has a disadvantage, a physical disadvantage over someone who's under the age of 12? So
puberty is where the point where male and female athletes diverge. And so male athletes with puberty get this huge surge of testosterone. And, that causes greater height, greater muscle mass, higher hemoglobin, and a host of other physical factors that allow men to be much more successful in sports than women. And this male-type puberty will occur to anyone who has testes, including trans women. So, that is established scientific fact. And it is certainly established that some of these advantages won't go away. Height isn't going to be reduced at all by hormone therapy. And so some advantages will remain. But even in the WNBA, where height is so important, there's not a single trans woman competing. So if trans women were so overwhelmingly advantaged in a sport like basketball, where height is so crucial, then we would see this occurring. And so there have to be some compensatory disadvantages that trans women have, because there's not a single trans woman competing in the WNBA today.
What do you make, Joanna, of these laws in states like Texas and soon Florida that basically are going to hold parents responsible and basically charge them, or they have the potential of being charged with child abuse charges if they allow their children to transition? How scary is that for the trans community?
It's very scary. I grew up in a time where if you transitioned openly, you were a pariah in society. And the advances in acceptance of trans people in general over the last 20 years has been greatly heartening to me as a trans woman. And so to see this reversal in several states is extremely disheartening. And I really feel for transgender kids and their parents in all of these states who are facing this horrible abuse.
And one of the things Dr. Michelson said earlier, Joanna, is that the trans community has become the target of many of these state legislatures, many of these red, state governors. And she says there seems to be more of a general acceptance of the homosexual community, gay, lesbian community, but the trans community has become the real target of their ire. Do you think that's true, that somehow trans people are being separated from the LGBT community? We kind of saw that with the North Carolina bathroom ban bill, so HB2 that Dr. Michelson brought up. Has it just worsened for the trans community, and are you really being separated from the rest of the gay and lesbian community?
I think there's truth to that, and I apologize if you can hear the dog barking in the background. It's not my dog. So up until 2015, the groups that are well-funded anti-LGBT groups were focused on stopping same-sex marriage. They lost that fight. They didn't stop fundraising. These groups didn't go away, and they had to find a new target. And so the target that they have found is trans people. And as you say, the bathroom bills, they didn't create as much traction as they wanted, but they really hit home when they zeroed in on the trans people in sports issue. And that has proven, ideological gravy for the right-wing population. And so it's extremely unfortunate that these groups have now focused in on the trans community because they've been successful with these attacks.
Yeah, what Dr. Michelson talked about efforts that the trans community is engaged in to fight back. She talked about, public outrage, about use of social media. What else can be done to oppose these anti-LGBTQ laws and to really stop the hate that we see, the violence, not necessarily the hate in people's heart, but the violence that is being perpetrated against trans people?
I'm a scientist. I'm not a political person. My gut reaction would be saying, vote the bastards out. But, that's easier said than done, of course. It's not really my area, but, I would hope that people can't win politically with peddling hate, but, maybe they can, which would be a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joanne, for joining me this morning. Again, she's the author of Sporting Gender, the History, Science, and Stories of Transgender and Intersex Athletes. Thank you so much for your research and your work. And thank you for joining me this afternoon from the UK.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right, my next guest is Dr. Deville Goins. She is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's also the author of You Mean I Can Have God and Be Gay? Welcome back, Dr. Goins.
Thank you for having me back.
Dove, I should call you. And full disclosure, Dr. Dove is my niece, and she's been on the show before. And I always love talking with you because I think you have such an interesting perspective, being a member of the LGBTQ community yourself and being a licensed psychologist, that actually treats, young people, older people, other people who are a part of the community. I know recently you had a chance to go to a pride parade where our vice president was speaking. Tell us about that parade and just generally what you've been doing to celebrate Pride Month.
Oh, okay. I made sure that I was going to catch up, make up for lost time, because the last 2 years we didn't get to celebrate. So I booked every event I could. And out here we have 4 back to back. So there was Black Pride in DC, which was Memorial Day weekend, then Annapolis Pride the next weekend, then DC Pride. And I attended that. And then next week, or this weekend coming, is a Baltimore Pride. But at the Capitol Pride, I went to the parade. And when I say that it was so much joy and love, I didn't see protesters. You know how sometimes when you see the parades, you see people out there with their signs and they're protesting and you're going to hell. I didn't see anybody out there doing any of that, which was surprising, but it was also refreshing. It was, there were kids, there were adults, it was everybody from every race, gender out there celebrating, having a good time. And that was at the parade. And then we got to the festival. And when I looked up and I saw Vice President Harris speaking, I thought, oh my God, we have support. We really felt loved and included. It didn't feel separate. It felt like we really are a part of the family of the United States. Like we belong to. We're not just some separate entity trying to find a space. Like we're not stepchildren anymore. Like we're part of the family. And
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I guess you would say that there's been a lot of progress in terms of acceptance of gay people. But what do you make of the conversation I was just having with Joanna and Dr. Michelson about laws in a state of like Florida and Texas that are clearly designed to roll back so many of the rights that gay people have accomplished or achieved over the last 2 decades?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm personally, because I work with a lot of youth, like one of my earliest, the youngest trans kids that I've seen was 10 years old. And fortunately for that particular person, they had supportive parents. But even here recently, I've had clients reach out to me whose parents were not supportive of that lifestyle or that of their kid being trans or LGBTQ. And I've been asked to hide my own, sexuality, so that the kid can get the help that they need, and despite the parents not necessarily approving. Now, from what I've experienced, I've seen so much progress just from having these kids who come in and they don't have self-love. They don't, because they're not taught that they're okay. It's okay to be who they are. And so when I heard about the law being passed, Don't Say Gay, and I'm essentially like, you know how many kids are going to be in the classroom that are LGBTQ, whether they're out or not. And so essentially you're saying, let's act like they don't exist. And then if you teach that at an early age, that gets perpetuated. So by the time they do get to 4th, 5th, middle school, high school, then you have this discrimination. You're still perpetuating that same hatred and discrimination that we've seen in the past so much. So, and then also to make it mandated or mandatory that if you find out that your kid is, or if a teacher finds out that their child is LGBTQ, that they have to inform the parents. And I can't tell you how many parents I've encountered that would not be supportive of that. You are putting those kids at risk for being abused, for being kicked out of their homes. One of the biggest struggles that LGBTQ people have had is learning how to love and accept themselves. Now, I'm going to share something that I haven't shared a lot, but in 2006, because of my sexual identity and struggling with that in my background in religion, I actually committed suicide, completed it, and died, crossed over, but I came back. And when that happened, it began to change my life, because I was always taught that if I die, there's hell on the other side waiting for me. But there wasn't. it was pure love. I mean, I can't even, it changed my life. And so coming back and living this life now is like, well, I don't know where they got the hell part from, but all I know is that I'm supposed to be here. I don't even have the same desires to like exit the world like I used to, because I hated who I was. I called you a couple years ago and I said, you know, Auntie, how do you learn to love yourself? Because I didn't know how.
Well, let me slow you down for a minute, Dr. Dove. So when you say you committed suicide in 2006, do you mean literally you committed suicide, or do you mean emotionally you felt like you died?
Literally, I hung myself. And my ex-girlfriend at the time found me, cut me down, and then I came back. So that is, it's not something that I've shared a lot, just because it's been so, I was still processing what happened, because initially when it did happen, I didn't fully understand it. But as time has gone, I began to really understand what that experience was for me, and why I work with so many LGBTQ people now, because these kids, I've had so many kids come in who were cutting and they were suicidal.
Dove, you got to stop. You're just like glossing over something that's so, you hung yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking in that moment before you did that?
I was in a lot of pain. I wanted the pain to die, you know, that I was in, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to repair it with myself. I didn't know how to repair it in my relationship. I didn't know how to repair it with my understanding of who God is. And it just felt like really overwhelming. I felt hopeless, like I can't do this anymore, you know.
How old were you?
30. I was 30 years old. Mm-hmm. I'm 45 now.
How did you decide, like hanging yourself, like that method?
Well, because I early on learned how to, self-injury I started when I was about 14, and I was cutting growing up, and suffering from bulimia. It's like all these self-destructive behaviors, because I didn't love who I was. I couldn't accept me. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't that difficult of a transition to go from you're already hating yourself, hurting yourself, to the next level. And that would be like the next level. So, you know, I don't know. It took a lot. It's a scary thing to think about ending your own life, but I think I was just in a really, really dark place at that time.
I'm trying to give you like this big virtual hug. Like,
right there.
Oh my God. How long were you hanging there before your girlfriend found you? Do you know?
I don't know, because there's no sense of time outside. Like, I understand that we're spirit beings now, like I didn't before. There's no time, but the presence on the other side is pure love. When I felt my spirit coming back, or being like laid back down into my body. And I would liken that to a mother laying her newborn baby into a crib. That's how gentle and loving the presence was. And I've never felt anything like it, completely unconditional. I don't have a fear of death anymore, because I don't fear the other side. I'm like, okay, that's where we come from. That's pure love. This is where we come to be tried. So I know that I'm here for a purpose that I'm supposed to fulfill. I didn't even think I could work with gay people back when I wasn't okay. And now it's my whole niche, because
Did you go to a hospital? Did you check yourself into a psychiatrist? I mean, like, after that experience, what did you do?
So at that time, I just kind of dealt with it at home. I have been in the mental hospital twice for suicidal. Previous times I had taken some pills, you know. Of course, I've seen therapy. Then once I decided to become a psychologist, now that really helped me understand myself, even just through dealing with other people, because everyone seems to be a mirror in a way. They're showing you some aspect of you. So here I'm helping them, but I'm really talking to myself at the same time. So I get to help and I get to grow at the same time, because these kids are coming in, and sometimes I'm hearing my identical story. And I'm like, okay, I'm here. You don't have to end it, because it does get better, but that has to happen through self-love. And that's what I had to learn.
We hear, Dr. Dove, so much about the rise of suicide amongst young Black men and women, many in the LGBT community. And it's just always so shocking to me when I think about 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds, even 25 and 30-year-olds feeling so hopeless in that moment that they can't see that tomorrow or next week or next month might be better. How do you, as a psychologist now, having lived through it yourself, having studied and obtained your degree, how do you get kids to see that even the pain they're experiencing today doesn't have to last always, and that there is some hope?
First of all, I'm very transparent as a therapist, so I don't mind sharing my experiences with the kids that I work with. Or the adults that I work with. And they seem to really appreciate it because people want to talk to someone who they feel like understands, who gets it. And so when I talk to them, I share that experience, which helps them to not feel like it doesn't get better. I became a doctor after that happened. So, I'll use my personal experience, but also, again, I think it all comes back to the self-love journey is what I call it. Every client that comes in, I'm like, you are now on the self-love journey, because if you don't love yourself, then you can get to that dark, hopeless place, and we've been so reliant upon others loving us in place of ourselves, and we don't know how to love ourselves. So we're like, accept us, the rest of the world, heterosexual community, please accept us, love us, love us. And so many of us don't love ourselves. And so with them, I'm working with, okay, you have to learn how to love yourself. When was the last time you told yourself, I love you? And so many people are like, never. Well, if you were in a relationship and no one told you that they loved you, you would feel some type of way, but you're in a relationship with yourself. So I really promote that, is developing that personal relationship with self.
I know that these, the parents, you talked about how dangerous it could be, laws like the laws in Florida where teachers have to out the kids to parents. What would you say to a parent right now that is just refusing to accept that their daughter or son may be gay or may be trans? What message do you have for those parents?
Well, I would first ask if they're prepared to lose their kid, because whether you lose them to death or because they leave, and a lot of people do that. They just kind of dismiss themselves from their family who is not accepting. And if you have parents that don't care at that level, then that's a whole other conversation. But what I like to do is hold up the mirror for the parent and the kid, because they are expressing some part of the parent that is suppressed or wounded usually. And if I can show them that parallel and they can see themselves in that kid, then they can begin to have more compassion. Some people they hold hard to their beliefs. And it's hard when you have been taught that this is the right way for so long, and you're afraid that if you don't do it this way, then, your kid is going to be eternally damned. And I understand that. I had to reframe that in my own head, where I get it. Okay, this is the way that you can love me right now. You're trying to protect my soul, right? But my death experience has taught me different. So I let people be where they are. I use the example of an 8th grader doesn't try to teach a 3rd grader geometry, because they're just not at that level. Life has to give them more experience before they can understand geometry. So people who are discriminative and prejudiced and they can't get it, I'm just like, okay, 3rd grader, you'll get here someday. Yeah, not this lifetime, another.
Do you know the comedian Gerard Carmichael?
I did see his stand-up, yes.
Okay, I want to talk about that, because here's Gerard Carmichael, very successful African-American young man in his early 30s. He does this HBO special, new stand-up called Nathaniel, and you think it's going to be one way. And he starts out talking about his father having affairs and having to, tell his mother about his affairs. And near the end, as you know, he ends up telling us that he's gay. And it's his coming out in this comedy special that isn't so funny, and you don't know how to feel. I mean, I felt sad. I was kind of, weepy watching it, because here he is talking about telling his brother, and his brother says, man, I love you, but I don't do that gay shit. And his best friend saying, man, you tricked me. I never wanted to have a best friend that was gay. And his mother saying, I love you, but I love Jesus more, basically. And he's really talking about what it's like to be a Black, not just gay, but a Black gay man, as he calls it, from the hood. So where you're supposed to be the ultimate in macho and have this bravado, here he is having to tell this community, because he had lived, if you go back to his earlier specials, he talks about girlfriends. So he had lived in the closet and had, portrayed himself to the world as a straight Black man who liked women. And so here he is at 31, I guess 32, saying enough is enough. And we were all, my whole family watched it. We were just saddened by the burden of a gay person having to do that. Because as a heterosexual, you don't have to come out and make some grand announcement that you're heterosexual. You don't have to deal with how your mother's going to respond, or your best friend, or your brother. And I guess the bigger question I'm asking in 2022 is that burden that Gerard Carmichael shared with us in that hour. Is that still the burden that gay people, particularly gay Black people, have to carry just to be who they are?
As you can see, rocking my mohawk, this is me being authentically me. I am very androgynous, right? When I first started working here, I was in a button-up blouse. I was trying to fit the role, play the part, not look too gay, And since then, I've understood that being my most authentic self is the only way, the only path to self-love. That's the only way you're really going to get other people to accept you, is because, I believe people treat you how you treat yourself. So if you don't love you and you don't accept you, but you're asking other people to, that's kind of a contradiction. So to see, him come out like that, or like Ellen, her stand-up. And the first time I watched her stand-up, I couldn't accept it. I was like, oh no, this is too much gayness. And then I watched it again just not too long ago, and I was like, yeah, just because it's liberating and it's free, and it's hope. It provides hope for people who are still in the closet, and there are plenty of people who are still in the closet, even in my family. But I found that being a forerunner and coming out of the closet, and even being out on Facebook and saying, here, I'm here and I'm queer and it is what it is. I get a lot of private phone calls like, hey, I'm dealing with that same thing. And I don't believe in outing anybody. If they're not ready, you don't do that, because you don't know what effect that's going to have in their lives. But the more I see certain individuals coming out and stepping up to the forefront, the more I feel hopeful for the generations that are coming, along.
But I guess I'm asking, Gerard's story, it seemed like it was so difficult for him. And is that reality? I mean, he's a celebrity, so he's in a little different class. So he's got to think about career, how Hollywood's going to accept him, blah, blah, blah. But in your practice, is it still as difficult for a person today in 2022 to announce to their family, because he's 30 years old, he's no kid, I mean, he's a full-grown man. Is that decision and that statement, is that as difficult today as it was 10 years ago? I'm just trying to figure out, is it any easier? Or because looking at him, it seemed like we were in the 1930s or so. Like, I just kind of wish he had said it up front and then told us some jokes. Like, dude, that ain't really even that big of news. Like, why a whole hour on this? Tell us some jokes. But, not being LGBT, I'm an ally. I'm not in the community. So is it that hard, I guess is what I'm asking you, because it just goes too hard.
It is still challenging. I mean, I have clients over 50 years old who are, especially being a Black male, I mean, it is more challenging because of the stigma that's associated with. They're really supposed to, like you said, be really masculine, macho, provider of the family, and just past Sunday, I was out at Nellie's, and I'm telling you, it was nothing but Black men in there, and they were gay and popping it and flopping it, and I was like, yes, they are being themselves, you know what I mean? So, but they feel like they have to go to a safe space to do that, and then even at the parade, there was one guy out there that we had started talking to, and he was like, "This is not normally. I'm in a business suit and a tie, But out there, he was in his Speedos and twerking it, And I thought, this is where we have to come to be free, And we have a space for us. But yes, it still is definitely challenging, especially for Black men to come out. Women have been a little bit more accepted in terms of it because they've been romanticized or fantasized about in that sense. But even with the trans, I think that they have shifted, and it's like they just keep finding a group to penalize, and it's like, okay, we didn't win here, but oh well, this is really bad, and this is. But you said that about interracial relationships before, and everything there. Oh, this is not acceptable, and then I'd like to think that we're constantly evolving, and so eventually this will not be as huge of an issue, and then they'll pick the next group. Maybe it'll be the tatted and pierced. I don't know, but it just seems to progress. So currently, I do think it's still a challenge for people to come out to everyone. People will come out individually, certain people, but in a big way, yeah, that's still challenging.
Give us one thing that we can do as allies during the month. June is Pride Month. We celebrate. We talked about the parades, the festivals, all that's great. But if there's one thing that you would want allies, the LGBT community, to do in this month, what would that one thing be?
Say gay. Say gay.
Get comfortable.
Talk about it. Yes, just it's, people would say to me, oh, that's her friend. No, that's my girlfriend. Let's call it what it is. Let's not pretend, because I'm not pretending anymore. So
if you haven't seen it, and maybe you have, I'm watching this series called All American, and it's about football. It's a football special, but they have a gay couple. And in fact, the gay woman, she looks, your uncle, my husband, Ernest, we were just saying how much she looks like you. So you should watch it.
Okay.
And it's a gay couple, and they are openly affectionate, and they say girlfriend, and it's so wonderful to see a female couple portrayed in a series like that. That, again, there's no shame. They're accepted by their friends, and they're just loved. And the woman, her name is she's a rapper. Her name is Breezy, and she plays this character, Tamia Cooper is her name in the show, and they call her short for Coop. And she's a rapper, and it's just a wonderful expression of a gay couple, and people who aren't comfortable with gay people. I think this is a great example because they show you all the layers and all the different things that, gay couples go through that look just like what the heterosexual couples are going through in this episode. So I don't know if you've seen it, but look at
I will definitely check it out.
Check it out. I think you'd like it. I think you'd like the portrayal of the love relationship between Tamia and her girlfriend's name is Patience. They're both actually singers in this little drama series.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dove. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Again, you're the author of a book called You Mean I Can Have God and Be Gay. I love that you are now loving on yourself and teaching others to go on that journey of self-love, because what you experienced as a child and as a young woman, we don't want kids to have to go through that. We don't want them to have to self-injure and feel like, there's no hope for tomorrow and get to the point of suicide. There's too much to live for. And
absolutely,
your sexual identity doesn't, dictate your worth and your ability to be incredibly, amazing and to make incredibly amazing contributions to our society. So Keep celebrating Pride Month and
Thank you.
being your authentic self, because we love you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Love you as well.
All right. All right. I want to thank all my guests this morning. This is Pride Month, and I think Dr. Dove put it best. Say gay. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid to say gay. And the way that we end the stigma is by talking about it, is by having the courage to have conversations that may be uncomfortable for some people. But gay people are no different than, heterosexual people. They have the same desires, the same feelings, the same joys and pains that heterosexuals have. And two consenting adults, what they do, who they decide to love, who they decide to marry, how they decide to carry themselves in the world should not be dictated by state lawmakers, should not be dictated, by governors or even by our U.S. Supreme Court. Remember when we all used to talk about love is love? Hopefully, we get back to that point where we recognize and love people for who they are and not who they choose to love. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.